Hey, welcome back to another episode of the She's Making an Impact podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Ngom. Today, we're diving into your health and energy, specifically as an entrepreneur and being a good steward of your body. So I brought in Robin Rhine McDonald. She is a faith-based holistic health coach, and she mixes her seminary background with her study of integrative nutrition to help women develop the energy and vitality to live out their unique God-given calling. So we're kind of like going into some touchy things. We talk about overeating and gluttony and just being good stewards of our bodies. And it's very important topic. So I'm excited for you to listen, and let's dive in. Hey, Robin, welcome to the show.
Hi, Rachel. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes. So tell us a little bit about you and what you do.
Yes. So I am an integrative nutrition coach, and I am first and foremost, follower of Jesus. That's the most important thing for me. Then a wife to the most wonderful man. And I also reserve going on and on about how wonderful I think he is, but praise Jesus for him. And I've got two little guys. I've got a almost 2-year-old, almost 5-year-old. And what I am super passionate about is helping Jesus-loving ladies create healthy lifestyles that last. I want to see the bodies that comprise the body of Christ healthy and well, so that they can do what God's called them to do without hindrance.
Yeah. So how do we partner with the Lord to create healthy habits that give us energy? Because like our audience is mostly entrepreneurs. And so the thing is, like, if we don't have energy, we can't do the thing that God has called us to do. Right. And so if we're like overeating and we're overweight and we're tired and like all these things that come from having an unhealthy lifestyle, we can't do the thing that God has put on our heart to do. So it's really important that we have that healthy lifestyle. So how do we partner with the Lord to create those habits?
Yeah, I actually think being an entrepreneur can be to your advantage for creating a healthy lifestyle. I was just talking to a friend about how entrepreneurs, like we're a special breed. I was saying how by the time I was 12 years old, I had started like 4 little kid businesses. The idea of like selling something was like exciting and not weird. It wasn't like so. And I think we have this kind of we're achievers, we're creators, we're go like for the vision, for the purpose of what we're going after. And I really think that is perfectly aligned with the approach that I take with my clients. And so my podcast is called the Vision Driven Health Podcast, because I'm wired that way, where I'm like, if there isn't a vision, if there isn't something I'm excited about or going after, then like I'm not probably going to go for it. And so as an entrepreneur, you're up to something. There's something you care a lot about. There's something you are putting in all of your time and effort and energy and prayers towards. And yeah, of course, you want to have that energy. And so if you can then really allow the Lord to reveal to you the connection between your passion and what you're going after and your health and your energy, and you can start to see how these certain choices are actually going to further this mission, or going to enable me to go farther, that kind of becomes your like Holy Spirit unlimited motivation. Like it's always there. You go to your vision, what you're passionate about, and then you're like, oh yeah, and my health is going to allow me to keep going. But the thing that I think we forget to address when we're going into trying to improve our health or whatnot is oftentimes there are underlying beliefs that are hindering us from creating true transformation. So in the same way in your business, if you don't believe you can actually do this, if you don't believe that your business is going to bless people, it's going to make an impact, if you don't think you have the capacity to do it, I'm a failure. All these lies that come into place, it's not going to happen, right? And same thing with your health. If you have been continuing to have the perspective of I'm weak-willed, it's just a matter of time before I fall off track, I never stick to anything, I'm not worth the time and effort it takes to actually create healthy habits, or to, maybe you make certain requests or to do certain things, I'm not worth it. And maybe it's not even a conscious thought, it's subconscious. You're just like, I don't feel confident. Like, I'm not even worth the time for all of this. And the other thing too are those beliefs and fears we have maybe from our family or our culture, where it's like, well, everybody eats this way, so how am I ever going to break the mold? Or my parents, my grandparents, everybody's ended up with diabetes. Everybody ends up with, all these issues and stuff, high blood pressure, high cholesterol. So I can already see it, like I'm on my way. And so we're confessing and believing these things about our health, and we dive into a diet, we dive into a program, we try and make some changes, and we never deal with those core things. And that's actually what's driving us to repeat those cycles. And so when I work with my clients, every program, every one-on-one, everything starts with, what are the lies you've been believing about yourself and your health? Let's break that. Let's take hold of the truth and build from there. Then we'll talk about your nutrition, your macros, all the things, and we'll go into all that. But we always got to start with that process. And that's the first step of partnering with God to create a lifestyle that actually will last.
Amazing. And I think that's so important. Just like you said, it's like people believe the lie diabetes runs in their family. So like my husband's from Senegal, and so many people in Senegal have diabetes. It's not that it like runs in their family, it's just they eat a lot of rice and drink a lot of juice,
Right.
So I'm like, if you just change the way you're eating, then you break the cycle.
And it's so tough because, if it's a cultural thing or something that even has been, I imagine, I don't know if juice was always part of their culture. I imagine it was probably something introduced by the Western world.
Probably,
right? Yeah. And so it's tough when there's been those kinds of introductions or things that just like, well, everybody does this. But what we often don't realize is it's 80% of our lifestyle choices determine what our health outcomes become. Only 20% is genetic. So we actually have a lot of influence on how our body expresses those potentially genetic propensities.
Got it. Can you elaborate on the relationship between kingdom business and kingdom health?
Yeah, I think you can't take one out with the other, and you might not recognize that kingdom health is, already in your business, but it's, if we're of the kingdom, if we're following Jesus, right? That's what we're up to. I'm not interested in doing stuff if it's not what he's wanting me to do. And it's kind of like even something that I'm like, is this what you want, God? Like, okay, are we good? Like, and if we look at the life of Jesus, we see most of the passages, the verses in the Gospels are focused on physical healing. And, I think, at least I've noticed in Christian culture, we'll kind of set aside physical health or well-being as like less important. It's, it's not the spiritual things, it's vanity, it's, whatever. And we'll kind of set it aside as this less important carnal thing. And yet, Jesus, God incarnate, spent most of his 3 years of public ministry. And he only had 3 years, and obviously he made talk about impact, he made a huge impact. And he chose to spend his time healing physical bodies. If physical well-being was not important, was not a part of kingdom work, was not a part of being and doing what God has called us to do, then Jesus was wasting his time. And you and I I'm sure your listeners don't believe that Jesus was wasting his time. So just by looking at his life and example, what he chose to invest in, we see that there's something to our physical bodies that matters to God and actually has an impact on how we show up in this world.
What does the Bible say about nutrition and our health?
A lot. Actually, there's a few different angles you can look at it. And one thing that I have enjoyed doing on my podcast, I created a second episode on Wednesdays called Holy and Hungry, and it's kind of like a health devotional. So we could pull a lot of different scripture in terms of just mindset and perspective and caring for our bodies, but there's some really cool passages specifically on food and what to eat. And I know everybody's favorite book of the Bible is Leviticus, right? So we spend all of our time, having our devotionals on the laws. But Leviticus 11, the food laws, which I know probably not many people have focused on or have just like kind of skimmed over, it's really cool what the implications of those laws have for health and well-being and nutrition. So if you look at it, it's talking about, okay, don't eat animals with cleft hoof this or cleft that, and don't eat, these ones and that one. It's going into all these details. It kind of seems like, okay, well, that's kosher stuff. That's Old Testament. But what I find most interesting about it, one, all the animals that are not recommended to consume, if they were eaten at that time, would have caused the Israelites to get sick and die off. This group of people was charged with the mission to be a blessing to all nations. God, that's what God had when he was setting up these covenants and what he called them to do. That's what they're supposed to go out and do. Mm-hmm. Now, it makes sense that he would give them direction on what to eat to ensure, like many other people groups of that time, didn't get diseased and die out. Mm-hmm. And even too, during the bubonic plague, and I think it was about the 1400s, the Jews, as unfortunately they have frequently gotten a lot of flack in their history, but they were being attacked, so to speak, at that time because they weren't getting sick. They were following their food laws and their cleanliness laws. And it was helping prevent them from experiencing as dramatic of sickness and death during that time. So back to the food laws in Leviticus 11, we look at those animals, like I said, and they would actually be harmful. And you look at the other ones that are recommended, it's high protein, it's very nourishing when you look at the details of it. And if someone were to actually follow a kosher diet, it's actually really good for you. Now, with every label these days, whether it's like gluten-free or organic or kosher, we found ways to make all of those unhealthy. So you can have organic donuts and kosher donuts. But if we really got like to the nitty-gritty of Leviticus 11, we see that it's actually very, very informative on how we can care for our bodies. We also have the garden, right? God gave us in Genesis 1 plants to eat for food. But then we have Genesis 9 when after the flood and Noah and his family and all the animals are going out, God gives a reintroduction, so to speak, to the earth and what's available for food. And at that time, he actually says, you can eat the animals, you can eat the plants, all the things. And so from that point on, and this is kind of what I find interesting, I personally believe that in this state of humanity and the research that's out there, consuming meat, animal products is beneficial. And I think there has been some kind of argument or attempt to say that like the Genesis passage proves like God's original design was just plants, and maybe it was, but regardless, we have Genesis 9 that is showing animals and plants are good for food, the nutrition that God, again, they were charged to go populate the earth. That's everybody else died. And so they were told this is what you eat. And then you also have the food laws, which included those products. And then we have Jesus's life again. We look at Jesus. He was eating a Mediterranean diet. We know it, if nothing else, we know he ate fish because of the feeding of the 5,000. Yeah. And so we can see, and lamb for the Passover. So we can see that there is instruction, there is wisdom behind it. The more you dig into it, you can kind of see the benefits of eating whole foods, getting your protein, eating the plants, and having that well-rounded approach to your diet.
Yeah, actually just found another one. I was like, where does it say in Proverbs about honey? Proverbs 25:16, if you find honey, eat just enough, too much of it, and you will vomit. I think
Proverbs has a lot of those bits about
I know
food and gathering and preparing and eating and whatnot. Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, for us today, it's not just honey, it's just like sugar in general. Like eat too much sugar, it's going to make you sick.
Totally. Absolutely.
So how can we as busy entrepreneurs make sure we're prioritizing our health? What does it look like in terms of like creating a schedule or just making sure we're feeling our bodies and moving our bodies well and just being good stewards of our bodies?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that one of the biggest things, in the same way that, as an entrepreneur, especially depending on how long you've been an entrepreneur, there's that whole season of trying to figure out a schedule that works for you. Because when you're doing your own thing and you make your own schedule, it's so easy to lose productivity. It's so easy to get distracted. And there's kind of that trial and error period where you eventually figure out a routine that works for you and that actually serves your purpose and what you're doing. In the same way, for your nutrition and your health, you have to figure out a rhythm that works for you. So I highly recommend across the board, you need to meal plan. Now, meal plan, I think for a lot of people looks like that, like all day Sunday meal prep, you got the little containers and you do all of that. That is an approach. You could totally try that. But there's other ways you can do it. And so the 3 different ways I encourage my clients to kind of experiment with is that one. They call it the major bulk day, meal prep day. You take a few hours, you cook a bunch of meat, you cook a bunch of veggies, you cook a bunch of starch or whatever carb you're choosing to do, complex carb, and you put them in little containers and you just grab and go. You don't care about variety. You don't care about, whatever for your meals. Easy peasy. If you have the time on the weekend. I did that for, I don't know, like 6 months, and I got burned out on it. I was like, I don't want to come home from church every day and spend 3 hours in the kitchen. Like, at first I was excited about it because I found like this cookbook that was going to show you how to do it, and I had all these fun recipes. And after a few months, I was like, I'm done. So, but it might work for you. The next one is to cook like 2 to 3 times a week. And what you do is you just cook massive portions. This in and of itself takes practice, depending on how big your family is. My husband's a giant. I'm large. I'm 6 feet tall. I have 2.
I'm 6'1". High five, tall
woman.
woman.
That's fun. I did not know that. Yay. Well, so you understand. We've got to eat.
It's funny when you meet people off of Zoom and they're like, "Oh, I had no idea you were so tall." I'm like, "Yes."
It happens all the time. I think I have kind of like narrow shoulders, so nobody ever really knows.
Yeah.
But with that said, we eat a lot, and what happens, I think I'm making enough for like double, triple to have the next night or whatever. And it's kind of like whatever is provided is what will get consumed. And so you kind of have to figure that out for your family, like how much you really have to make, or if you have to like set some aside so your hungry boys don't eat everything. But then what happens is you only have to cook 2 to 3 times a week. Everything else gets kind of repurposed and pretty simple. You don't have to spend all the time. And then if you can find meals that you cook in large portions that only take like 30 minutes, even better. Then the third way, which I actually kind of fall into more often because I still struggle to figure out the portion thing and how to repurpose stuff with how much my family eats, is you can find like easy 20-minute recipes to make every night. You plan out in advance, you have everything you need. If you know what you're cooking in the evening already, and I think as an entrepreneur, we have an extra advantage if you're working from home in particular, because, for example, if I know, like tonight, I'm going to cook up some chicken, sweet potatoes, and probably some broccoli, and I have this bomb where our lemon tree is exploding, and so everything's lemon. I'm like, what can I make with lemon? And so I'll go here in probably like a couple hours, and I'll go put together the marinade and marinate the chicken and throw it in the fridge, and then go back and work some more. And so you can kind of do those sorts of things if you know in advance what you're going to cook. So that for me tonight, using that as an example, I toss the chicken on a baking sheet, cut up the sweet potatoes and broccoli, put that on another baking sheet, throw it in the oven, walk away. I love things that require like 10 minutes of effort, and then I get to walk away, whether that's to play with my kids or clean up the kitchen or work some more. So finding those kinds of recipes multiple times a week is also super helpful. So you kind of have to figure out what works for you.
Yeah. Do you recommend following like a specific diet or counting calories or counting macros, or that there's so much that I think
know.
like a lot of probably millennials or like especially like women who grew up in the 90s are kind of like, what do I do? How do I eat? How do I live?
I know. We've been around the block, millennials. We're we're not old. We're just farther along than I mostly realized. But yeah, so we've had plenty of years to see a lot of different diets, a lot of different styles. When we were little kids, our parents were all trying Atkins, no fat or whatever. And I remember the 100-calorie things were huge or whatnot when we were, I was at like high school, college or whatnot. And so yeah, we've been exposed to a lot. And then even now in our adulthood, there's paleo, keto, gluten-free, yes. So my big thing, there is a concept called bioindividuality. So every single person is an individual. We have our own biological dynamic, and what works for you might not work for me. You and I might be more similar because we're similar stature, and we probably have similar needs. But even from a just like, you might not do well with gluten and I can process it okay, and all those different factors. So that's something to keep in mind. And that comes from learning to be more aware of your body, learning to kind of check in with those cues. But there are across the board health concepts that I do encourage people to take hold of. One being that you try as best as you can to consume whole foods. So that's single ingredient stuff: beef, chicken, pork, broccoli, apples. It's nuts, seeds, cheese. I'm okay with dairy. I like quality. I'm my whole thing is how can I try to consume whole foods? How can I consume nutrient dense foods? So when I'm putting together a plate, I want to make sure that what's on my plate is going to serve my body the best, right? I've got a vision. I know where I'm going after. I want to have that energy to be able to do what I'm called to do. I don't want to eat my lunch and then go to work on a project I'm excited about and barely be able to keep my eyes open. So when I'm putting together my plate, I make sure that I've got a good amount of protein. It usually for me comes from animal products. Greek yogurt's a great option. I eat so many eggs. We've actually got some chickens. They're like a few weeks out from starting to lay some eggs. I'm like, hallelujah, praise Jesus.
Yeah.
I'm so excited about them. And lots of beef, lots of chicken, all those different ways of trying to get in protein. So that's like the biggest thing I try to put on my plate. You do want to get the fiber. You do want to get those vegetables in there. There's a lot out there too, even about how vegetables with the oxalates and the anti-nutrients and whatnot. That's valid. It is. And bioindividuality does come into play with that. And so sometimes that can be tough to discern when you're like, I'm just trying to eat clean and eat my veggies. Like, what? Like, I can't have the kale or I can't. So you kind of want to test that out. Safer veggies are the cruciferous vegetables if you're concerned about all of the anti-nutrients and stuff. So like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, asparagus is usually fair game. It's when you get more into like the greens like kale, spinach, those usually, if someone's concerned about those different factors, which again, they're valid. I think there's research that it can affect people negatively depending on their makeup. But I still get my veggies in. I think that's important. And then the other thing is having complex carbs, because we've also seen a lot of the like no carb, keto, like carbs are the devil kind of a thing. And I love carbs. I just want to make sure that they're going to be processed well in my body. So I do a lot of sweet potatoes. I do potatoes as well. I do a lot of fruit for my carbs. I do nuts, have some to a certain extent. Sometimes we'll do a little bit of legumes. So then I also do sourdough. And that's where that's where I have a little bit more fun. We'll do family nights and we'll do homemade sourdough pizza. And that is bomb. I was actually really excited. I figured out how to make spelt, which is an ancient grain sourdough pizza crust. And I told my husband, I was like, do you like it? This is like the healthiest grain crust that you could possibly have. And he's like, yeah, it's pretty good. I was like, pretty good. But figuring out those different ways to eat whole foods at home. And the second thing I'll say with that's in that same vein, the more you can get in the kitchen and cook. I just had one of my clients in my Healthy Weight Loss Academy post. It was such a cool post. She's like, I wanted to share this with you guys. She said that last year she could count on one hand how many times she cooked, because I guess she has this awesome, precious grandma who like cooks massive portions of food for her whole family. But she said it was more like Southern comfort food. And so just since March, she now cooks almost all of her meals herself. She's been practicing meal prepping, and she's down 20 pounds since the beginning of the year. And she said she's actually come to enjoy cooking. She's discovered like it's really encouraging and almost fulfilling. It's very satisfying when you discover that you can do something you otherwise had never done. You realize the creative outlets for it. So whole foods and getting in the kitchen. Those are two big things you can do to really improve your nutrition.
I like the bio-individuality aspect of it, because I think a lot of people, like I was the health coach for many years before I started this business.
Nice.
And people would just be like, just tell me what to eat, like create a meal plan and give it to me.
Yeah.
And what I found, because like I ate vegan for almost 2 years and I was probably 15 pounds heavier, felt awful, like did not do well on that. My
Yeah.
husband, however, does really well without meat,
Mm.
and he cut out meat and he does really well.
Yeah.
He's from West Africa. I'm like Norwegian descent, right? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I think that's gotta be a part of it. Like, what works for you? Like, you
Yeah.
feel great, you do really well. However, he actually found he was eating a ton of quinoa that gave him joint pain in his knee. Yeah. So it's
Oh.
like just really interesting to just play
Hmm.
around with your nutrition to see like what works for you specifically instead of saying just tell me what to eat, but like that's like the easy way out, but we have to figure it
Right.
out for ourselves.
You do. And in the same way that we're figuring out our business, and I know I know in my business and most things in life, being like the little achiever person, I'm like, God, just tell me what to do. And
Yeah.
he's like, this is a relationship. Like, I want you to come to me and talk to me and hear from me. I don't want to just tell you what to do and send you off. And I'm like, oh, okay. So like same thing with your food, like
Yeah.
invite him into the process of like, okay, God, I'm trying this, and okay, God, that I'm feeling this way. Like he's interested. He's very interested in being involved in the process, and he's faithful, to reveal what's working and what's not.
What do you think about gluttony, a sin that's like not talked about, but is definitely in action in America and especially like church culture in America?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. We're gonna go there.
Sorry,
Let's do
took you
it.
off guard with that.
No, that's great. It's great. I mean, at the end of the day, I think one of the things that we are seeing in our country right now, and even in the church, is we are shying away from things that are very specifically said in the Bible are not kingdom and
Mhm.
are not serving us. And I think we've gotten really good at justification, like just
Mhm.
not being justified before the Lord, but justifying, behavior and whatnot.
Yeah.
And I think we've also gotten really good at victimhood.
Mm. Oh yeah.
And yes. And so, you know,
McDonald's made me do it.
yes, exactly. Yes. Or I just had such a hard day. Like all I want is to just, I don't want to have to cook. I don't want to and
Mhm.
so we kind of get into this victim mentality of like, I deserve this. I had such a rough day. Like, and not to invalidate hard times and challenges and whatnot, but at the same time, are we actually taking hold of God's truth and really recognizing how we aren't aligned with him, how we're not stewarding our bodies, how we're
Mhm.
not even taking hold of God's grace? Because in those moments where we feel the desire to binge, we feel, that need to just kind of go off the rails or whatnot in our food and our eating and be gluttonous, we're forgetting that God's grace is sufficient to
Mhm.
meet us in those moments where whatever challenge we're going through, whatever pain we're feeling, whatever trauma is surfacing, he's there. He can meet us in it. We don't have to go to the food.
Mhm.
There's breakthrough available in that. And so, to answer the question, is gluttony a thing? Yes.
Yes.
And I think it is a problem. And I think at the root of it is we're forgetting the way that God can meet us in that, even in those kinds of things and moments, and having a heart and posture that's just like, I'm trying so hard. I feel like this day and age too, God's preparing his bride. Like he really wants to purify and refine. And I'm like, Jesus, like whatever yuck is in there, please reveal it. And then like there's moments where I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is disgusting. Like, and I'll start to feel like really down on myself. I was like, oh no, wait, okay, thank you, God. Okay, I know you're not gonna leave me here. Like this is really gross. I need you to help. Like blah, blah, blah. And so, if one of those things is feeling more selfish or
Mhm.
self-focused, feeling more gluttonous, feeling, those things that are maybe leading to being dependent on food and finding comfort in food.
Mhm.
Even as an entrepreneur, we're grinding and maybe you, I don't know, put together a campaign. I know there's times where I'm put together something that I think is going to work and I'm going to get a bunch of sales. It's going to go really well. And then it doesn't. Like those are the moments where some poor eating habits can come into play or to be perpetuated, right? Where it's like, it totally flopped. Like, all right, I'm ordering the pizza. Like I'm having a night to myself. I'm just going to wallow, etc. And then that one night turns into multiple nights. And, our the entrepreneurial journey is very emotional, and
Mhm.
we're invested, we're going up and down, we're up and down, and food can often become our vice for regulating that and trying to cope with that because we care so much about what we're doing and we want things to work out. And so we actually have an opportunity to grow in our relationship with the Lord and even be more solidified in our foundation with Him as an entrepreneur by taking a peek at how our food habits and how we're showing up in that area of our life.
Mm-hmm. So how would you advise someone who maybe they have a tendency to binge during like stressful moments?
Yeah. I mean, obviously the first step is awareness and being able to acknowledge like, yeah, I have a problem. I'm not showing up the way that God has designed me to, that I know this isn't what He has for me. And really taking it to Him and spending that time with Him about it. And I think part of that is knowing His grace, that He's good, that when you bring it to Him, it's not going to be like, yeah, this is pretty gross. You're disgusting. And, that obviously that's not how He approaches it. And so really like, if you have to spend some time reading passages on His goodness, His grace, His faithfulness, and, in preparing your heart to bring it to Him and just say, God, like, I need freedom in this. And really asking Him the questions too of what's behind this, what's feeding this, what's fueling this, and allowing, the Holy Spirit to reveal that. And, it might be that you're feeling out of, maybe too strict and rigid in what you're doing in your business. It's like you've got a plan, you've been sticking with it, everything is rigid. And so the binge is the opposite of the pendulum, where you're like, well, I just get to do whatever the heck I want with my eating because I'm so rigid in what I'm trying to accomplish in my business. I'm being so on top of it. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, there usually is some kind of vice because it can be stressful. And the bigger you build, the more success you have, the higher the stakes, and so if we're not careful and we're not intentional, those things can turn into binge eating disorders. Those things can turn into gluttonous behavior. Those things can turn into, even maybe having desserts or maybe drinking too much alcohol, depending on what people's different preferences are on that. Like if you're okay with alcohol, I'm personally okay with it, although I haven't drank like hardly any because I've been busting out babies and breastfeeding. But it's something to be mindful of and thinking through, okay, God, like, and I've known entrepreneurs who said, I don't see anything morally wrong with having a glass every now and then, but I'm drinking it too much and it's not serving my, what I'm called to do. I don't feel like I can be responsible with this right now in this season. And those are the kinds of things we have to look at and say, okay, is this an area that I need the Lord to heal? What underlying trauma, what underlying stress, what underlying things are there that are creating this behavior? And I would say too, with that, in addition to coming to the Lord before it, we are meant to be transformed and supported in community. And so finding a group, finding a resource where you can be held accountable and supported in that process, I think is massive. Having a support for nutrition and health coaching is also really helpful so that you've got someone who's able to check in with you and say, hey, like, if you're really enjoying, eating that whole carton of ice cream on those nights, like, let's find a healthy alternative. Like, we don't have to throw the ice cream out. Let's just find a way to make that healthy and reasonable and in alignment with what you're going after. Because I will say, I personally love having a sweet treat almost every single night, but I just make my little healthy versions and it works.
I taught my parents how to make like keto fat bombs, and I got those.
Yes.
And their minds were like blown. They're like, wait, we can have like chocolate every night? And I'm like, yes, you can. You're welcome.
They're like, what? Yeah, there's so many tasty things. Like, I feel like the options for healthy desserts and treats or snacks that are high protein or high fat are so numerous. We're so blessed to have all those options these days.
Yeah. I know. I even like throw some collagen powder in there and they're like, wait, there's protein. And I'm like, yup.
I love it. Amen.
So good. Where can we connect with you?
Yeah, for sure. The Vision Driven Health podcast. That's where I'm putting out a lot of what I've talked about here and being able to, and the Holy and Hungry episode on Wednesdays. There's a lot of information I put out that way. You can also go to visiondrivenhealth.com/resources. If you enjoyed my little bit about Leviticus, I have a food label reading guide that comes in the resources that I actually did an episode on in parallel conjunction to Leviticus 11. There's also my 5-day sugar fast devotional. I think that's a great starting point for a lot of people. Talk through fasting from a physical standpoint, from a spiritual standpoint, and then you go through a process of partnering with God and really laying down some of those things. So there's quite a few resources all on that page that you get all of it when you go there, and would recommend checking that out and being able to stay in touch that way.
Cool. Thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, of course.